All right, let's dive into one of history's most dramatic turning points, the American road to independence. We're going to uncover how these simmering tensions over things like taxes and rights just exploded into a full-blown revolution. And, it all kind of starts with a really strange fight over a cup of tea.
So let's start with this central paradox, right? Parliament passes a law that makes one of the colonists' absolute favorite drinks, tea, cheaper than ever. And what do they do in response? They start a revolution. I mean, it sounds completely backward, but if you can understand this one question, you get to the very heart of the entire conflict.
See, this fight was never really about the price of tea. Not at all. It was about something much, much bigger hiding inside that teacup. A fundamental principle that was going to change the world. The idea that people have the right to govern themselves.
Okay, so here's the setup. The Tea Act of 1773 was basically a corporate bailout. The incredibly powerful British East India Company was in some serious financial trouble. So Parliament's plan was simple. Let the company sell its tea directly to the colonies, cutting out the colonial merchants who usually acted as middlemen. This would actually lower the final price for the colonists. Sounds like a win-win, doesn't it?
And when I say the company was in trouble, I am not kidding. It was literally drowning in almost 15 million pounds of unsold tea just sitting there in warehouses. This act was designed to move that massive surplus and get some cash flowing, and fast.
But the colonists saw right through it. They knew that if they bought this cheaper tea, they would also be paying the small tax that came with it. And paying that tax, it didn't matter how tiny it was the same as saying, yep, Parliament has the right to tax us without our consent. As one colonial newspaper put it, they saw it as a trap, a trick to establish a precedent that would just open the floodgates for any tax Parliament could dream up in the future.
And they were not going to fall for it. Instead, they responded with one of the most famous acts of protest in all of history. And that protest, well, it provoked a brutal punishment from Britain, one that would escalate this whole thing from a debate into a full-blown crisis.
And this, of course, is the Boston Tea Party. This wasn't just a few troublemakers running wild. It was a highly organized act of political defiance. After weeks of debate, dozens of men took direct action, destroying a fortune's worth of private property, 342 chests of tea, to make their point absolutely crystal clear. No taxation without representation. Britain's response was swift and it was severe. Parliament passed a series of laws that the colonists immediately nicknamed the Intolerable Acts. This was no slap on the wrist. This was designed to break them. I mean, just think about the effect of all these things together. Britain systematically dismantled Massachusetts' economy, its entire government, and even its justice system, all while forcing colonists to house soldiers in their private homes. The message was clear. We're going to make an example out of you and crush this rebellion for good.
But it had the exact opposite effect. I mean, it backfired spectacularly. Instead of isolating Massachusetts, the Intolerable Acts horrified the other colonies. They realized, hey, if Parliament can do this to Boston, they can do it to any of us. And suddenly, food and supplies just poured into Boston from all over the continent. This was the moment a common enemy began to forge a new shared American identity out of 13 totally separate colonies.
Okay, so this newfound unity, it needed a voice. It needed a plan. The next logical step was for all the colonies to actually get together and coordinate a single, unified response to what they all now saw as a major threat.
And so they did. In September of 1774, delegates from all the colonies except Georgia met in Philadelphia for the First Continental Congress. You cannot overstate what a monumental step this was. For the very first time, the colonies were acting not as 13 separate little entities, but as one single coordinated body.
And maybe their most important creation was something called the Continental Association. Now, this was an incredibly radical document for its time. It established a colony-wide boycott of all British goods, and, this is the crucial part, it gave power to local committees of ordinary citizens to enforce it. It was basically a revolutionary government in all but name, uniting the colonies and empowering regular people like never before.
But, as all this political organizing was ramping up, the situation on the ground was getting worse. The conflict was about to turn from a war of words and boycotts into a real war of bullets, even as so many colonists were still desperately hoping for peace.
The year 1775 is when everything just spirals completely out of control. Look at this timeline. War breaks out in April. A super bloody battle follows in June. And yet, even as an all-out war is kicking off, Congress is still trying to pull back from the brink. They send a final olive branch petition to King George, literally begging for reconciliation. And what's the king's response? He declares them all rebels. This perfectly captures the paradox of 1775. The colonies were fighting a war and suing for peace at the exact same time.
This really strange situation, it was a reflection of the deep divisions happening inside the Second Continental Congress. On one side, you had the radicals, guys like John Adams, who were pushing hard for full independence. And on the other side, you had the moderates, especially from the middle colonies, who were terrified that supporting the war was a step too far and still held out hope for some kind of peaceful solution.
But by 1776, the whole momentum had shifted. A series of key events, plus one very, very powerful pamphlet, would finally push the colonies to make that ultimate final break.
And that pamphlet was Thomas Paine's Common Sense. Published in early 1776, it was an absolute runaway bestseller. Paine didn't use complicated legal arguments. He used fiery common sense language that pretty much everyone could understand. This one simple, powerful idea that is just plain absurd for a tiny island to rule a vast continent. It electrified the public and made independence a mainstream topic of conversation, literally at every dinner table and tavern.
Then came a British military tactic that backfired, big time. Virginia's royal governor offered freedom to any enslaved person who would run away and fight for the crown. Now, while it was a practical move to try and weaken the rebellion, it absolutely terrified Southern enslavers. It helped convince many of them that their entire way of life and the institution of slavery itself might actually be safer in an independent nation that they controlled.
So we get to the crucial moment on June 7th, 1776. Virginia's Richard Henry Lee stands up before Congress and introduces the formal resolution. There it is, in plain language, a motion to declare that the colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. The final debate had officially begun.
And on July 2nd, the vote was called. The result, as you can see here, was nearly unanimous. 12 colonies voted yes. New York abstained for the moment, but they approved it a week later. And just like that, with a simple vote, the legal ties to Great Britain were severed forever.
But Congress wanted to do more than just declare independence. They wanted to explain to the whole world why. And the public document they came up with, drafted mostly by Thomas Jefferson, did something truly profound. It moved beyond the usual arguments about the specific rights of Englishmen and made this universal claim, based on natural law, that all people have rights that no government can ever take away.
But of course, achieving that unity required compromise. An early draft of the Declaration actually included a passage that condemned the slave trade, but to get the votes of delegates from South Carolina and Georgia, and even some northern delegates who profited from the trade, that language was removed. It was a painful compromise that would have consequences for centuries to come.
So, on July 4th, 1776, Congress approved the final text. They had created a new nation, founded on the highest ideals of liberty and self-government. Their words would go on to inspire millions and millions around the world. But that brings us to the final, critical question. They had declared their independence on paper, but could they actually win it on the battlefield?